All right, are you guys ready for our next speaker? I'm going to take that as yes. All right. Up next is the VP of Customer Experience at First Circle, a company that's reimagining how small, medium enterprise finance works in Southeast Asia. He's a behavioral scientist. Now I feel like he may be analyzing everything I do right now, but he focuses on applying insights from behavioral economics and psychology to decision-making and behavioral change. He co-founded the Irish Behavioral Science and Policy Network, which brings together the thinkers and doers of behavioral science in Ireland, and also a behavioral researcher at Warwick Business School. Please, ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming on stage from First Circle, Sean Gill.
Good afternoon, one and all. It's wonderful to be here on such a gloomy and rainy day outside. You wouldn't know it in here with the energy and the positivity in the room. I'm going to talk today about thinking behaviourally. I think the last panel talked a lot about political issues. I would think they're human issues, they're behavioural issues. This can help us in the work that we do within our companies, it can help us with our own personal development, it can help us just thinking about life and better understanding why do we do the things that we do. But before we jump into what it means to think behaviourally, why am I a behavioural scientist? So that's my cat coffee up there, just waving at everyone in the crowd. So 10 to 15 years ago, I had a sports injury. I got very sick. I had a couple of operations. I had one operation where I woke up and unfortunately my spinal cord had been punctured. My legs, I'd lost power of my legs. And in the last 10 to 15 years, I've spent almost 4, if not 5 years, completely bedbound. I needed to figure out how can I improve my life situation, how can I take ownership again. I think the last panel talked a lot about the idea in psychology of learned helplessness, which is if you think you can't do something, you don't try to do it, which then proves to you that you can't do it. And this is what happened to me as an individual, and I originally studied maths and economics, and I thought everything in life was rational, and humans were easily understood, and that just isn't the case. We're highly emotional, we make often predictably irrational decisions, and I suppose learning about how can I bounce back from my own health condition, and then how can I help others to think behaviourally, not only within their own life, but within trying to solve problems for users, because ultimately everyone in the room we're problem solvers. It doesn't matter whether we're a visual designer, whether we're a researcher, whether we're a product, whether we're in design, we're trying to solve problems, and they need to be real problems. And what I'm going to talk about today is a framework for how we can think about more systematically and using a bit more science so it's, we have a lot of magic in what we do, but also how can we be a little bit more rigorous. So behavioral design is effectively a mesh between the best of design thinking and human-centered design, behavioral science and the literature or all the academic work from across behavioral economics, sociology, anthropology, any discipline that looks at human behaviour and why we do what we do. Because again, I don't care where it comes from. I just want to use it if it can help me understand, myself, my users, problems within the business. The last panel with Polo and Ellie talked about organisational design. They talked about decision making. There's loads of research that shows us how we can de-bias decision making, how we can understand our own biases, etc. So it's a mesh between those two things, and also impact evaluation. And this is effectively a stronger, more comprehensive version of A/B testing. And this comes from medicine, which was one of the first disciplines to really embrace randomized controlled trials at scale, because we're trying to move one variable, and often when we're moving so quickly in a business, it's very hard to run an experiment for everything, but it's really useful to have an experimental mindset, because any solution we think about, it's just a hypothesis. We think it's going to drive something, but maybe it won't. So from the scientific process, we're trying to build on what we already know about human behavior. So, for example, we know on average we suffer from confirmation bias, as in we seek out information, we look for information that proves our point of view. It's very hard, if not impossible, to de-bias yourself. You really need to create systems or structures around you to try and help the individual. So instead of, it's very useful to think from first principles and to have a beginner's mindset, absolutely, but we also, if we find that something replicates in 19 or 15 countries across hundreds of thousands of people, well then maybe we should use that learning and work from it and not try and prove it again when we only have so much resource to work with. So we're trying to use the scientific method, have hypotheses, leverage. It's only in the last 5 to 10 years that the wealth of insights around behavioral insights, the bank of behavioral insights has built up that now, I have a database, or in First Circle, we have a database of 450 to 500 biases that are either patterns which help us understand why people do what they do in the current state, or their strategies. So we have behavioral patterns, why people do what they do. Behavioral strategies help us to nudge behavior in the right direction, where we're helping the user and we're helping our business as well. And when it comes to systematic iteration, Dyson, I think it was 5,126 refinements of the Dyson Hoover before he got it right. And it was the rigor with which he tackled that problem that helped to really break down when redesigning a totally new product using science, that he was able to get there. So at the end of this talk, I'm going to introduce a framework, and hopefully you can use it to tackle problems in your own life, in your user's life, in organizational design, in decision making, in absolutely anything. Now, why is this important? And if I asked any in the room, what business are you in? You might say, I'm in finance, we work in health, I work at a bank, I'm a designer, I'm a product manager. But really, we're all in the behavior change business. We're all trying to get someone to do something. So, in the last panel we talked about how do we convince, how do we get a seat, how does a seat open up at the table, or how do you influence people to buy into user research, or rather UX and user research and design, and just a product mindset more generally. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get someone to do something. They're either trying, it's about starting doing something, it's about stopping doing something. It's about doing it once. It could be about doing it for a short period of time. It could be doing it from now on. So if I'm trying to, if I have a meditation app and I'm trying to get you to build a habit of like Headspace that I use every day, that's a totally different problem than it is to trying to get you to fill out a sign-up form for the product once, potentially. And it's useful to remember that different strategies work in different contexts. And there is many different ways to change behavior. So like traditionally an economist would say, it's all about rewards, it's all about money, it's about incentives. That's the way we're wired. I give you something, you're more likely to do it. The lawyer would say, no way, waste of money, let's regulate behavior. Let's make sure that people can only do a certain number of things. The marketer would say, no, it's all about persuasion. We're going to communicate the benefits and how great it is, and how we're going to help them overcome the challenges they're facing. And with a behavioral designer or a problem solver or just designer more generally would say, let's think about the context. What's happening? Who is the person? What's the environment they're in? Because often that drives more of our behavior than anything related to the individual. Maybe incentives might work sometimes, but other times it might backfire. Maybe this is about persuasion and trying to communicate, or there was a great strategy I talked to my mother about when she was babysitting a child down the road, and the child wasn't doing cleaning the room, and my mum was tasked with looking after her for the weekend, and she was going to clean her room. And she was asking me for advice. And, you know, my mom would say, oh, you know, it's time to clean your room, you know, it's so important, etc., etc. No budget. What I recommended she do was, so his name was Connor, and my mom, Mary, said, okay, Connor, on a scale of 1 to 10, how ready are you to clean your room? Right? Now, Connor, being a clever guy, was, he was only a 2, which is quite low. I think we'd all be a 2 when we were only 8 or 9 years old. But then the next question was, okay, Connor, what do we need to do to get you from a 2 to a 3? Why did she ask that question? Because now Connor has to play back and ideate and come with ideas why and what would drive him from a 2 to a 3. And then he's thinking, well, okay, 2 to a 3, well, you know, if I tidy the room, then my mom might be happy when I get back. You know, I football practice later on, maybe, you know, I could do it before then. So she suddenly reframed the whole conversation to get Connor to talk about why he would do the behaviour. And she didn't at all say, you have to do this. So it's just interesting how different techniques in different contexts can be very powerful. Now there's 3 kind of top level key behavioural insights. One is information overload. We can only take in so much information at any one time. Just like all the messages I'm going to talk about today, you'll only remember snippets. And we operate generally on 2 levels, System 1 and System 2. System 1, it's fast, it's automatic. Someone bumps into you in the street, it's your first response in your mind. System 2 is slow, it's deliberate, it's much more conscious. And we often think that users are in System 2 much more often and that they're objectively looking at the benefits and the drawbacks of using our particular product or service. So it's important that we design more for System 1, and we appreciate that people, you know, we live busy lives, and often people aren't thinking that much about what we're trying to get them to do. Next, it's unconscious behaviour. Because so much of our behaviour is on a System 1 level, we're heavily influenced by our environment to an extent that we really don't appreciate. No one thinks that advertising works on them, but they can understand how it might work for some people, which is interesting. So our environment is critical. And also, and this is especially in the Philippines, we're incredibly social beings. We care so much about what other people do and how what we do looks like to others. So for example, at First Circle, we lend to small businesses to help them with cash flow issues. And we do this through if you have an invoice or if you have a purchase order, so either you know, you're not going to be paid for 90 days and you need the money now to pay staff. So that's one example. Another would be you're trying to take on a new project, but you just don't have the cash to buy the goods to deliver the product or the service. So those 2 examples, but in the Philippines, there can be at times a particular stigma when it comes to lending, financial lending, and often some businesses don't want another business to know that they're getting short-term lending because they think that that might look bad on them. Whereas in the US or in the UK, the same stigma around business lending isn't the case. So it's really important for us in First Circle to be thinking about, you know, how does this speak to the business owner or the people in the business, our customers, and you know, what are their concerns and worries, and how do they think about their community? Because ultimately, you know, in the Philippines, it's a massive community, and we need to think about the power of social ideas. And we're going to jump into the framework in one sec, but I think one thing that's really important to clarify, and this is, we often think about outcomes when really we should be thinking about behaviours. What do I mean by that? So signing up or increasing revenue, increasing conversion, they're outcomes. Or let's take a healthcare example. When I was bedbound for such a long time, I had an extra 15 to 20 kilos on me because I wasn't that active. Now, if I want to losing weight is the outcome. It's not a behaviour. I can't lose weight. What I can do is I can eat, you know, an apple a day. I can cut out particular types of foods. I can drink more water. I can try to go for a walk. Or what I do is go swim twice a day. Because if I don't swim twice a day, I lose a bit of power and sensation in my legs, and that's why I often have a stick to support me. Because sometimes I can be just walking down the road or on the stairs, and I'll lose a bit of support. So where we want to think about what the behavior, what's the action, not the outcome. So we want, behaviors drive, or rather behaviors lead to outcomes, and solutions, or our products or services, we're designing them to try and drive the behavior. So, and it might sound a little bit abstract, but we're going to dig into it in 2 secs. So one formula to throw at you. Behavior is a function of 2 things. Well, it's 4 things, but it's 2 things at the high level. It's the person, so it's their motivation and their ability to do the behavior. So do they want to do it? Can they do it? How much effort is it to do it? And their environment. And this is their physical environment. So do they have the time to do it? Do they have the money? Do they have the resources? And their social environment. Who around them is doing the behavior? Do they think it's a good idea? Do they think it's a bad idea? So this is, and I'll hold off till we dig in a little bit more. Now, Ange mentioned loads of squiggles and process. We can focus a bit too much on process. All we've done is we've taken the best of lean, design thinking, double diamond. There's a couple of researchers and friends in Warwick Business School and University College London that have developed a behavioural framework that they've worked on with 100 researchers over the last 10 years. And the only difference between this and the original double diamond or any of the design thinking frameworks is effectively we're diagnosing behavioural bottlenecks, and we're using behavioural patterns, which are insights about behaviour that we see every day. So when we see confirmation bias, we know that insight, and we can look for it, and then that can help us better understand why someone is doing or not doing something. And then when we're ideating possible solutions, we have starting points from the behavioural strategies because we know that it works. So for example, Obama used something called a behavioural strategy called implementation intentions during his first election campaign. What's this? Implementation intentions is simply, if you say when and where you're going to do something to someone else, you're more likely to do it. So they knocked on doors and they gave them little cue cards and they asked people, which precinct are you going to vote in and what time are you going to vote? They didn't say vote for Obama. They just asked about, are you going to vote, when are you going to do it, where are you going to do it? And that led to a 20% bump in voting in that particular area. And fortunately, more for Obama in that case, but it's that principle can be applied in any domain. If we're trying to get someone to do something, if they commit to doing it at a particular time, especially if they do it publicly, they're much more likely to do it. So what we are going to talk about now, so the behavioural diagnosis is effectively the second step. And there are kind of six key steps. Many of them we effectively, it's only at a kind of steps 4 to 6 that it gets a little bit different from probably what you're used to at the moment. So we want to pick start and endpoints. It's pretty obvious. If I think that the power of a map in general, or Google Maps, if I open up Google Maps and it shows me Dublin in Ireland and I'm in Manila, it's not very useful. So we want to make sure that we have the right map of the user's behaviour. Also, we need to pinpoint where they are now and where they're trying to get to. So, so this is pretty critical, as we all know. We're trying to select the user we want. And when it comes to selecting our user, often we think about personas and we think about segmentation, and we often do it based on demographic or variables that feel like there are big differences, but actually it's often the trigger or the context in which the user is in, and it's more effective to do behavioural segmentation. So if anyone's ever heard of jobs to be done, that's the way in which you segment based on behaviour and the context in which they're in. So remember, behaviour is a function of the person and the environment. So we have the start and the endpoint, we have the user, and now what we're going to work on is mapping the user journey in the current state. So we have a current state at point A, we're trying to get to a future state at point B. The behavior landscape is just every possible behavior, everything a user can do. So in our case at First Circle, a business could not take a loan from anyone. They could take a loan from a competitor. They could go to a bank. They could go to family and friends. They could decide they could actually not pay their employees if it was for working capital to pay their the monthly salaries. They could try and get earlier payment from one of the invoices they have. There's many different possible behaviours, and often a lot of the behaviours will be outside of the industry that we think we're in. So, you know, I can travel from Dublin to Manila for a meeting, or I could use Skype or Google Hangouts, which I often do. So, you know, those are in competition with each other. We often don't traditionally think they are, but they are, and it's really what job or what outcome am I trying to achieve. So, and then when in the Google Maps example, what's great about Google Maps is it gives me the best route from A to B. If I go veer off, it then gives me other options to get to B. Now, unfortunately, with our products and services, often we have one pathway, which is our ideal user journey. And if someone falls out, it's difficult to get them back in because our journeys don't adapt. So when we're designing our products and services, we're trying to make sure that we have the right behavior pathways in place. And if we can have more than one, then that's great to try and drive users along the route we want. And there are always two forces at play. So, you know, a behavior you're doing today, a behavior we want you to do tomorrow. There's friction, which is slowing you down. It's you know, every time you have to click a button, you have to fill out a form, that's friction. And fuel is all the forces that drive you towards doing the behavior. So it could be about the benefits, it could be about the challenges you're having at the moment, that they're so, you know, the solution you have is so bad that you're kind of incredibly motivated to move to another situation. And now we want to identify the bottlenecks. And like, what's a bottleneck? So a bottleneck is like a traffic jam. It's just, you're trying to get from A to B, you're stuck in terrible traffic, you might fall out of the funnel. So it's just a drop-off point. And what we want to uncover now is what are the behavioral reasons behind you falling out. And now, you know, we've identified the bottlenecks, we've prioritized the bottlenecks, so these are the most important ones. And how do we prioritize? We ask the question, if that was solved, would it have the biggest impact on the business outcome we care about? Because ultimately we're always working towards a business outcome, and especially when trying to work with people within the business, one thing we're all driving towards is the business outcome, and I think that's a great way to realign people at times when can be difficult conversations about process and the likes, because ultimately we're all in this together, we're a team, and we're trying to drive the business outcome. So we're selecting the behavior, we're saying who does it, where do they do it, when do they do it, how often do they do it with anyone else? And getting that specific is really, really important. For example, we have a referrals program at the moment, so a customer can refer another customer and they can get they can get a cashback on their next transaction with us, as well as multiple thousands upfront as well. When we were looking at the particular problem, someone said, oh, well actually after you refer, at the moment, you know, the customer, they can't track all the referrals they've given in our product. That is a really interesting problem, but that's a problem, that's a different behavior, because that's you know, the behavior we're looking at was how do we get a customer to refer their first customer? We weren't looking at how do we get a customer who's referred a few customers to refer more. So it was very useful to be so specific that we said that is an interesting problem, it's an interesting opportunity, let's explore that, but let's park it for this particular session, because the behavior we're focusing on today is what is the bottleneck behind someone not referring the very first time. And now we're getting to the really interesting bit, which is about diagnosing the behavioral gears that need to change. So remember earlier we talked about this equation, which is behavior is a function of the person and the environment. So their motivation, their ability, their physical and social opportunity. This is also known as maps. So what is maps? We can think about maps like gears in a car. So gears in a car help us to, you know, convert energy into movement. And in users, the four behavioral gears are motivation, ability, physical and social opportunity. And what we're trying to identify is which gear has to change for this particular behavior. Because often it'll be one or a small number, it won't be all. And it's really useful to get, I suppose, to be specific about exactly what we're trying to move. So when it comes to motivation, this is, do they want to do it? Is there an incentive to do it? What's driving them towards it? So for example, there's something called the goal gradient hypothesis. What is this? we are more motivated to do something if we see progress towards that goal. So for example, in this case, a coffee shop that has 12 stamps with 2 already on it, you're more likely to complete this than you are if there was only 10 stamps and there was no starting point. That's incredible. No one in this room would think that they would be more likely to fill out, 10 or buy 10 other coffees, but this is a really interesting finding. This is why when I swim in the morning, I swim in sets of 3, because I swim 1 lap, I'm 33% done. I swim 2 laps, I'm 66%. Now I'm only 33% my last 3rd lap, and then I just repeat this over and over again. And even when you know you're doing it, it's still powerful. Ability, so this is, do we have the skills, how much effort does it require, do we have the knowledge, do we have the memory? So there's a great study that looked at the split between housework in a family. And when you add up what a husband and a wife says about how much work they do, you get a lot more than 100%. So both of them think that they do 75% of work in the house, which we know is definitely not true. So the availability bias is that when we're making decisions, we tend to base them on what we can remember most, what's most salient in our minds. So if a national disaster happens tomorrow, there will be a big drive for insurance for national disasters over the coming months, just because it seems like it's much more likely in the future because it recently happened. When it comes to physical opportunity, this is about time, it's about resources, it's about finance. There's something called the fresh start effect. This is another behavioral strategy, and what this is, we're more likely to do something on the 1st of the year, the 1st of the week, the 1st of the month, which is interesting. So if you ask users to do something on those days, they're more likely to do it on other days because there's a fresh start, there's a new beginning. When it comes to the next, which is social opportunity, and social opportunity is about what are people doing around us, there's this concept called herding, and this is, we look to others, we look to the behavior of others, and we often think something is normal because other people are doing it too. So there's this great study of, you're in a room, there's 4 other people, you're looking at the screen, there's 4 lines. One of the lines is clearly bigger than the other lines. So this was in the 1950s, it was Solomon Ash's experiment. What you didn't realize was that the 3 or 4 other people in the room, they're part of the experiment. They're in on it. You're not. They all say that, line B is the biggest, when it's definitely not the biggest. And more than half of people in the room go along with the group because they assume if 3 or 4 people think that that's the biggest line, there must, I'm just not getting it, I'm missing something out. So herding, which is that we look to other people's behavior, what can be really powerful is often if most of your customers do something that you want other customers to do, well then, tell your users, use social proof and inform them of how many other customers just like them are also doing that particular behavior. So, just to close out, there is one example around mental accounting. And mental accounting is about how we think about money. So we think about money as if they're in different boxes, and it depends on where it came from and where it's going to. So if we think about when you open a financial app and you're looking at how much is in your bank account balance, we often don't, we generally have a checking account and all the money goes into one checking account. And people focus on they anchor to the wrong number because we think that we look at how much is in our account and we don't think about enough how much of that money is already spent by other bills in that particular month. So this is an example of taking a behavioral insight. So mental accounting is just a pattern that we see in the world, and then we think about how can we use it as a strategy to help users spend money more wisely. And the idea here is around something called the Sweatfree amount, which is how much money do I have to spend, do I have freely available that isn't tied up in bills already? Like, that's a really interesting idea. It focuses someone on the right thing, which is what they can do, not on all of the money that they can't use 75% of it at all. And in this example, the question then is, should it be shown on a daily, a weekly, or to the next payday? And should it be the plain dollar amount? And should it be the burn down bar graph? So multiple experiments to test out which is the most viable. So we see up here we have one for until the next paycheck, so $288, and the other is to spend next week. And what you find when you do this is that we think about money more on a week-to-week basis than we do until the next paycheck. So it's much more effective to tell someone how much they can spend this week or even this day over, till the end of the month, because we're just not very good at thinking about money. So, my God, I was doing so well. Okay, ABCD. We all learn our ABCDs. I have a new one for you, which is just all behavior is context dependent. All behavior is context dependent. It is not just about the person. It is not just about their motivation and ability. It is about what environment are they in, what are the people around them doing, do they have the time, do they have the money, are there triggers? If you send a trigger at the wrong time, like a great example lately was, I get an email from Cathay to say, your online check-in will be available in 48 hours. Okay, this is a terrible, terrible trigger. Why? Because, they're capturing my attention, but I'm not able to take any action. They're now going to send me another message, which I'm going to ignore the next time because I've had that experience. So we want to be very thoughtful about what behavior do we want people to do, and how can we ensure that we're sending the message or timing the trigger at the right time, so that they should be sending me the message only when I'm actually able to check in, because then I can take the action, I can do the online check-in, they're going to be happier and I'm going to be happier. So all behavior is context dependent. We have the MAPS behavioral gears, which combination of gears should we change? And we have just the power of being able to separate outcomes and behaviors, and we can apply that to all the decision making in our companies, in our lives, and just how we think about the world. So with that, thank you very much, and yeah.
Thank you, Sean. And now it's time for your questions. The first one is, what's a great use of the MAPS framework that you've seen or done?
Seen or done. So last year I was working on a project with Eli Lilly, who's a pharmaceutical company, and they have a particular drug that's given to diabetics when they're extremely low on sugar. It's an emergency product, and what was really interesting using the MAPS framework to tackle that challenge was that one of the biggest barriers to using it, so when you go extremely low in sugar, you can go unconscious, you can die. It's really rare. It's called a severe hypo event. It's extremely serious, and the biggest challenge that was in that particular situation was that the user of it is not the patient. The user is someone else. So it could be a family member, it could be a friend, it could be a colleague. So it's a really interesting challenge because the behavior you're trying to drive is not the person that you're interacting with, and you have to help them find it and then be able to use it in an emergency situation. And just to finish off, years ago you had to store insulin in fridges. So, and with this product you don't need to store it in fridges, but when we did the research, the fridge was the first place a family member or a colleague went to. So either you put it in the fridge, even though it doesn't need to be in the fridge because it's an emergency situation, or we use stickers that would direct you to where you needed to find it in the kitchen or to a location very close by. And it was just interesting when you're looking at multiple users and you're trying to identify, it's not a motivation issue because they want to do the injection.
Necessary.
Exactly, it's necessary. It's more just, do they have the ability of, and do they have the physical opportunity, can they access it?
Awesome. Your next question is, what's a constant behavioral bottleneck that you've seen in the Philippines during your time here?
What is a constant behavioral bottleneck that I have seen in the Philippines? That is a very good question. Well, the traffic would be the biggest bottleneck. That is ever present.
I'm pretty sure everyone here experienced it today.
No doubt. I would say Well, one really interesting thing I see a lot is that when we're talking to users or when we see other products and services being used by users, a lot of the feedback that they have doesn't make its way back to the company, and that people are very worried about giving negative feedback or constructive feedback when you're trying to seek help from them, and we have to think very carefully about how to have that conversation in the right way, because face is very important here in the Philippines, and we don't jeopardize someone's face by then giving us bad feedback, even though that's what we want to improve the product or service.
And your last question is, what are the best resources to learn more about behavioral science and strategy?
Okay, best resources. So there's something called the Habit Newsletter by a guy called Samuel. He's just released he's releasing a 4-part series on Medium for the top 100 behavioral books to read, which is really good. Predictably Irrational, a book by Dan Ariely, is super. There's a book called Thinking Fast and Slow, which is all about System 1 and System 2. And then there's a book coming out of First Circle on how to apply behavior design to solving problems with products and services that, if anyone is interested, do get in touch, and we'll be able to share some snippets before it goes live.
Well, we will look forward to that book, and thank you. Give another round of applause for Sean Gill.